So we have our final session of the day, investment and drug development. This is a session where at some level the rubber meets the road in terms of translating fundamental discoveries into things that might actually benefit real people. The first presentation of this final session will be by Denise Kelly. Denise joined Seventure Partners in 2015 as an advisor in the life sciences team for the microbiome field and is currently based in Aberdeen, Scotland. Prior to joining Seventure, Denise was a professor of immunology and microbiology at the University of Aberdeen, where she currently holds the title of Professor Emeritus. Special thanks goes to Denise for presenting now, given the late hour in Aberdeen. The title of her talk is Investment in the Microbiome Space. Denise.
Okay, super. I'm going to just try screen share now, so fingers crossed. Okay. So are we good?
Not seeing it yet, Denise. It's still starting up. Oh, here it comes.
Okay,
here it comes.
Okay. So I'm thinking maybe I might try to kill my video to see if it goes faster, because I think it's going to be slow to upload.
Sounds good. And your slide looks great.
Okay, let me just try to do this. Okay, so let me go, and if there's any problem, Leslie, just let me know if it's coming in slow, okay?
Will do.
Okay, so thank you very much. So first of all, I want to say a big thank you to Sarkis and also to Stephen and Leslie yourself for helping me with and inviting me to join, because this meeting has been fantastic. So thank you very much. So I'm going to move to next slide. Okay. So just confirm it's gone up. Is that okay?
Yes, I see 4 topics. Yep.
Okay, super. So what I'm going to do today is just cover the, just from an investor perspective, the scientific progress that we've observed that's really what we think driving the innovation in the field. And then I want to talk a little bit about the microbiome ecosystem, because when you look at it in its totality, you realize how big it is and how much it's expanding. And in doing that, then you can look at it from the perspective of the startup right through to what it takes to take a drug or to take a microbiome product to clinic. And then I'm going to touch on the investor landscape, and I want to spend some time introducing everyone to Seventure. And then finally, I want to look at the end and look at microbiome market predictions. So what does the market look like, and where are the emerging opportunities? So I'm on the next slide. And so just when I think about the last decade, I think it's been tremendous in terms of the progress. And I think it was Rob this morning mentioned, when we started with HMP and MetaHit, it's absolutely phenomenal when we consider the sequencing effort that's taken place over a decade, and how much we've progressed from some of the early papers that were published in Science in 2005. And then we also see that with costs coming down, massive progress in terms of types of sequence technologies. So we heard today from Joe talking about different 16S versus whole genome sequencing, and then the progression to long read. And what I like to see, and I guess it's something that we see a lot from the likes of NIST in the US, is this real focus on ensuring quality and robustness of the data. And I think it's very important when you think of the money that's invested that we go and we make all efforts to make sure that we are obtaining really high quality data. And in that context, the one thing that we are seeing a lot in terms of opportunities for investment is around building data platforms coupled with machine learning. And I think Rima's point, and it was one of the meetings I went to, the Gordon conference in Ventura, that got me so excited about the fact that we were now progressing to functionality. And by integrating omics and metagenomic data, we could really start to kind of really pin down mode of action and functionality. And I think the other area of development, which has been super, is the use of different models, so either humanized mouse models or human organoids, to provide the much needed preclinical validation that you look for before you head to clinic. But obviously, again, and you'll see in a moment, just the number of clinical trials that are ongoing. So in terms of scientific progress, in a way, this captures everything that was discussed today. I think with the sequencing, we see higher and higher resolution of what we know about human microbial diversity, not just in the gut, but in the skin and other body sites. And I think some of the papers that have come out in the last couple of years have really, really added to understanding of what the microbiome is, and importantly, not just those high abundant bugs, but also the bugs that are present at lower abundance. And I think, again, another point that I think is you're going to see much more of in the future is we are moving beyond the focus of bacteria. You know, everything's around bacteria, but certainly currently we've become very aware of viruses and the importance they play in terms of health. So, for example, even implicated in autoimmune diseases, I think we're going to see much more focus on viruses. And I was very intrigued by Joe Petrosini's result with the TEDdy study showing the viral signature in type 1 diabetes, and also clearly fungi themselves having a role. And then, you know, it was an absolute treat to have Michael Fishback and work where they're showing how we really are starting to understand molecules, biosynthetic gene clusters, metabolites, and how they're modulated by the microbiome and how they impact on health. So there is no question that we have come a long way in a decade. And I wanted to use this because I think it shows the level of publications that we're seeing. Just this field is continuing to grow. From an investor point of view, we absolutely monitor patent number. We look at patent output, and it continues to grow and escalate. And obviously, conferences are just very numerous, even if they are using media like this. But it's phenomenal to have been able to attend this conference today without having traveled to the States. So in terms of where we've come from an investment point of view, this slide says a lot. So it was actually taken from Bernat Oli, who's the CEO of Vedanta. And he looked at the startups in 2013, and there were a half a dozen, there were a dozen, maybe maximum, of these companies. And actually, just to flag one, which was my own, GT Biologics, I founded GT Biologics in 2008. And that company is now on the London Stock Exchange. But you can see, if you take it, that is what was there in 2013, and you look at today, there are hundreds and hundreds of startups. And I've just put a sample of some of the companies that we see out there, and in fact Persephone are going to present later. So the startup number continues to grow, which tells you that we're getting incredible translational impact from the excellent science that we're seeing. So in terms of modalities, I think it's worth just going back over, although I think it was covered today. There are a very significant number of modalities in the microbiome space. And so, for example, we've talked about fecal microbiota transfer, and I'm sure that Paul Carlson from the FDA will have plenty to say about that. We've discussed about the idea of being able to use defined consortia, then the idea that we can use single strains, or we can even take single strains and modify them using synthetic biology. And then, of course, from that, you also know that we can derive molecules from bugs that could be very potent, for example, cell surface or secreted, lots of very interesting bioactive molecules. And then you have the notion of precision editing, whereby we can go in if we recognize that we want to remove an organism, for example, pathobiont. We have opportunities such as using phage therapy or more targeted antimicrobials. So we've got a very, very diverse modality set. I should also say I'm focusing mainly on therapeutic drug, but these types of modalities also go into consumer products such as probiotics and prebiotics, and that is a big, big market opportunity in the microbiome. But it's really worth emphasizing, as of today, there's no FDA-approved microbiome product. And really, for the first movers, which there are many, and I can point out some shortly, there's been a lot of challenges which they've met. So one of them being the regulatory hurdles of using living drugs as medicines, living bugs as medicines. And that's obviously something it's not been achieved before. And obviously they're really navigating very new territory. So if you take, for example, FMT, we know it's been used successfully for the treatment of mainly recombinant C. diff. But there have been a number of FDA safety alerts in recent months, but also we've got to also be very mindful of COVID. So in some ways, perhaps the safer, more defined product, as Michael Fishback emphasized, you can account for every member of the defined consortia. They can be small or large, single strains. There's lots and lots of competition, but these products are moving forward in the clinic very successfully. And a lot of them are based on detailed analysis of large cohorts, looking at responder, non-responders, and trying to identify organisms that are missing in diseased patients. And then it's probably worth saying just at this point that molecules from bacteria, so those that are derived from bugs, or biologics for that matter, they tend to be more farmer friendly and perhaps more acceptable, but really in terms of an investment landscape, I think many of the investors who are moving in this field tend to be very receptive and open to all different microbiome modalities. So as with all of these modalities, you also see that there is major opportunities. So on this pie chart, I've shown where the major activity is, and it'll come as no surprise that gastroenterology, or targeting the GI, has been one of the most prevalent areas for intervention. And that intervention would be really targeting, for example, infectious diseases like recombinant C. diff, but there's also been a major interest around addressing immunological conditions such as IBD or autoimmune diseases. So what we're seeing is there's actually now indications where there's now more activity. So for example, we're seeing in terms of deal flow, more interest in oral microbiome. We're seeing more interest in women's health, for example. Obviously, the central nervous system continues to be very exciting, and skin is also an area that's emerging. So there's definitely trends now, and maybe what we'll see is this graph will look very different in another 2 years or so. I also thought what I wanted to do was to actually emphasize the level of activity, and I think it will be staggering to some people to look that if you go to clinicaltrials.gov and you use keywords like microbiome or microbiota, currently there are at least 2,500 registered clinical trials. So there's a real huge effort in really trying to understand at the level of the human being, the patient, what is the impact of the microbiome. And so just to illustrate this, I've plotted using MedTracker the top 30 companies. So these are really, I would call them the forerunners, those that are leading the field, many of them. And you can see that they have clinical assets. Some of them would be in the grey bars showing what you call preclinical, still at the research stage. But there's a fair number that are moving into phase 1, phase 2, and in fact some with phase 3. Now, why this is encouraging is obviously the phase 1 clinical gives you an indication of safety, and there's a view that these products, human-derived bugs that live with us, are generally going to be safe, and that looks to be holding up. But obviously, by the time you get to phase 2, you're starting to see some efficacy readout. But really what we're anticipating in 2020 for sure is phase 3 readouts from mainly companies such as Rebiotics and Ceres that will read out on their basically products for treatment, their FMT products for treatment of recombinant C. diff. So there's a lot of anticipation. I would say in investors' interest across the field. I would imagine many people are anxious and hopeful that these are actually going to turn out quite successfully. So in terms of the ecosystem and what it takes to get to clinic, I thought it was really worthwhile just taking us from what you do in the academic setting. So when you start with an idea, we talked about today, we look at integrating complex data sets, so multi-omics data sets, microbiome, metabolome, metadata, all of this comes together. We obviously want to ensure we have highest standard data, and then we start to build what does that pipeline, what does that preclinical validation look like? And what we're aiming to do is to really take that collective data, show it all adds up, and that we can really do what I've heard several times today. We drive the field from correlation to causality. And obviously, once you get to that point in the academic setting, the next thing we have to think about is intellectual property. And for an investor, it's absolutely crucial that the intellectual property is protected, and there's a lot of other factors which I'll touch on in a moment, but really it's critical that that's protected. And once you have this collection of assets, that's where we start to see formation in the form of startups, which then obviously build to biotechs. And what we ask is when we start to see a company, okay, what does the lead product look like? So we start to think, can you manufacture it? We ask the crucial question, is it safe? What's its efficacy like to be? So we're very aligned with the FDA, EMA viewpoint, ensuring that companies are talking to the right regulators and taking the best guidance. And obviously that's really vital for these companies to go forward, to put forward an IND filing, which is obviously what we're aiming to do to get the company from the startup stage into clinic. And to do that, we often look for partnerships with pharma and collaborations with KOLs. So ultimately, there's a lot of elements and probably many more. So you've got a huge industry growing from CDMOs, manufacturers, to CROs where they do all of the safety and independent validation, FDA involvement, it becomes, and the IP offices, it becomes a huge machine. And so when you look at the VC side of it, you can see that there's been an incredible interest from a number of venture capital companies like ourselves, like Seventure. We've seen Flagship have been very active in the microbiome space with a number of exciting startups. Others like Alexandria, OrbiMed. But then what was really exciting is pharma. And I think this is a really important thing to mention. Pharma are really starting to back the microbiome. They were hesitant initially, but they really are coming in. And at the moment, it's estimated that there's been about $1.5 billion put into the microbiome field to get it to where it is today. So I just want to take a few moments and discuss Seventure. So Seventure is a leading European venture capital fund. It's headed in Paris, but we've offices in Munich, London, Geneva, and Basel. We've 25 employees over. There's at any one time about 750 million under management. We have actually funded 250 companies since 1997, and they have completed more than 150 exits and 25 IPOs. We operate mainly in life science and digital, but it's important to say that we look at early stage startups, so early, and I'll define early shortly, and we're looking at an investment of around about 2 to 5 million, and we will follow a company through all its equity raises up to around about, and sometimes beyond, 20 million. So relevant to today, and something I really want to highlight, is we have had a number of investment funds. There are currently 4 that are focused on the microbiome. We've had Health for Life Capital 1, which has been fully deployed, and I'll touch on some of our investments just now. But we have recently announced Health for Life Capital 2, and our first close was 200 million. We'll have more announcements to make, and we continue to invest in the microbiome field. We have a fund that is dedicated to animal health and also one on sports and nutrition, so very much in the nutrition field. But actually it occurred to me today that maybe Seventure's next fund should be for Health for Life on Mars. So in terms of what we've done up to now, I think it's important to indicate that we invest globally. So in terms of consortia companies, we have invested in Vedanta Bioscience in Massachusetts and Cambridge in the US. We've invested in a company, Microbiotica, that have similar interests working on consortia and platforms, and they're based in Cambridge, UK. We've invested in companies that are working on single strain. So for example, an engineered company, Anor Pharma Sciences in Japan. It's looking at Bifidobacterium longum, engineered to deliver payload to tumors. And we've also invested in companies working on bioactive molecules from bugs. So for example, Enterome, and obviously worth mentioning Sarkis and Axial. So what does the microbiome look like, and market predictions? For those out there that are at this research stage, perhaps have captured IP, I think what I can say, it looks very optimistic. So these are market reports from Azoth Analytics taken in January 2020. And their prediction is that the human microbiome market will continue to grow. And they're predicting somewhere in the range of a CAGR of about 20 to 25%. North America will continue to lead. It looks like Asia are really catching, and also Europe maintain a very strong interest. In terms of the breakdown of the products, it's interesting that the drug side of it is actually looking at the moment 3.9% of the total market opportunity, where prebiotics and probiotics dominate. But I should say that that is anticipated to change dramatically as the value of drug products comes through. And so what we're expecting is that the market growth that we'll see in the coming years up to 2027 will be driven mainly by increase in drug development and also diagnosis. So they're anticipating a major growth in this particular area in the human microbiome space. So one of the things I think is really important, and maybe something that those who are working at academia and looking to do startups, is to look at the level of support that is out there. So what I've done is I've mapped some of the changes that are happening within the industry over the last year. So really from January 2019 to more or less today. And you can see that there's been some major pharma partnerships. So for example, Gilead have partnered with Second Genome, who are a small molecule company, but they're looking at molecules from bacteria. We've also had a very good collaboration between Ceres and AstraZeneca. So you can see pharma are really buying in. And also J&J, for example, who've announced a license with Locus Bioscience. And interestingly, we've had at least 2 companies that have gone public. So one being Biomex, which was one of our companies, and also Kaleido, which is a flagship company. So the news is good. Even with COVID, we continue to invest, and our intelligence is that things are still progressing very well. So in terms of emerging opportunities and what I see, we do a lot of deal flow evaluation, so I can say for a fact that microbiome and basically cancer immunotherapy are very hot areas, and obviously that's because of the focus on the microbiome and its impact on efficacy of checkpoint inhibitors. But we also are seeing some companies really shifting the needle and starting to look at some other really interesting drug therapies where combo approaches could be very efficacious. We're also seeing a big growth in omics data, machine learning, and I think that human-driven data, I saw the paper from Aaron Siegel just a few days ago where he's done an analysis of 30,000 Israeli individuals and compared it against US data sets and showing the importance of highly powered, large human data sets, which for most are going to be very challenging, but it tells you that we really need to look to big data. The other aspect that we see a lot of, which I think is going to move, there's been a kind of a slow movement of synthetic biology. You've got companies coming through like Synlogic, but we're actually seeing some phenomenally exciting opportunities around engineering bugs, obviously considering some novel payload, and that's also an area. And the final one obviously is a small molecule, which for me is an area that I'm extremely excited about. So I've been following Second Genome, but I've seen some novel companies out there and we're talking with them, and we hope to be making some announcements very soon in terms of our interest in backing those that are driving forward microbiome discovery based on small molecule, large molecule proteins. So finally, what I wanted to do in my presentation is to just sum up in a summary, what do we look for? And we are looking at the whole gamut, so from nutrition right through to drugs. And I know there was a discussion today about the importance of nutrition in relation to astronauts and how to maintain their diverse microbiomes. That's certainly an area of interest. But obviously focusing on the topic drugs, we look at everything. We look at diverse indications. And I just wanted to emphasize that we're now looking at the microbiome outside bacteria. So those that are targeting virome, that's great news. We look for the team, and I can say the investments we've made so far, the teams are tier 1, they're absolutely phenomenal. The science is breathtaking. It's innovative and it's differentiated. They normally come with a lead product, a platform pipeline, and excitingly, they have definitely showing that they're starting to really untangle and disentangle the mode of action, and more excitingly, targets at a cell level and also at a novel moiety that are in pharma space, pharma interest. We look very carefully at intellectual property. So we look at the fact that it is patentable. So particularly in the microbiome space, that's a big challenge. We look for novelty, inventiveness, and that there is adequate, it's sufficient, so that we really drill down to IP. And so talking with IP attorneys is quite important. We look for a business development plan, and we look for the road to clinic. What is the road to clinic? And really what Seventure aims to do is to partner and really facilitate that journey. So I think at that point, what I wanted to do was to use a statement that I was at a conference actually in the US, and this was a statement that came from Margaret McFall-Nagy, and I just wanted to read it out because I do see the microbiome as the next scientific revolution. And it basically is saying that true revolutions in science involve more than spectacular discoveries and rapid advances. They change concepts, and basically it is irreversible. So in other words, our view of the world as microbiologists will be radically and irreversibly altered, and has been. And I think we can say that we now fully appreciate the clinical importance of the microbiome in human healthcare, and I look forward to continuing to talk with companies that are looking to invest and to start up. So I think at that point, I would just like to thank you for your attention and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Denise. This is Sarkis. Wonderful presentation and a very optimistic end to your talk. We have time for a few questions. I think the first one you may have touched upon a little bit, but just to maybe ask directly, from an investor standpoint, how do you weigh the value of FMTs, consortia, LBPs, or molecules as technologies you evaluate?
That's a really challenging. I mean, to be honest, we have in Health for Life 1, we've invested in all of the modalities. I think now, and it's inevitable, science has progressed. So I think the bar for what we're looking at is higher each time. So I think, Health for Life 2, we're really pushing hard on, if you come with a consortia, we really want something quite different to what we've got in Health for Life 1. I think, we really want to see that there is an understanding of mode of action, that there's something very unique to some of the competitors. So for example, we're very aware of the competitor space out there, so particularly around consortia, even around single bugs. So it's really creating that differentiation, and I guess for us, maybe more so than whether it's a consortia or whether it's a single bug, it really is new insight that's not been already done. So in other words, that's kind of the challenge. So I think FMT, we have an FMT company in the form of Matt Farmer. We really like it. We really like how robust rebiotics have been SERAs. I think it's going to be interesting what happens in terms of the phase 3 readouts that are coming, just how we feel that's going. But what I will say is there is a move towards ecology approaches in product design and mathematical modeling. And I think, the FMT approach, I think there's still lots of lessons to be learned. I think a lot of data from the engraftment, understanding remission. So I think we're very open, but the bar's high in terms of really, justifying why we would want to do more investments exactly in those space. So it's really looking for the differentiation over what's out there. So not so much on recombinant C. diff just now, something different.
Correct. Yeah, and of course the biology drives these decisions, I imagine, to some degree as well, right? If consortia do things that an LBP doesn't, then that makes it inherent.
Exactly. I mean, science, I think, it's hard to say because we can't disclose what we're seeing, but science, the progress is driving the investment opportunities, and it's more competitive than I felt it was in the first 5 years with Seventure, but I would say so exciting to see what's coming through, and big hopes for real progress. Yes.
So we've heard a lot about metabolomics today, and their covariance of particular metabolites or groups of metabolites with various different human conditions. And so, how does Seventure, or maybe the investment community in this space, differentiate between therapeutics and diagnostics? Is there, can you weigh, the values, I guess maybe in the pros and cons of each?
I think therapeutics, I think the metabolite, again, I think what's wonderful about metabolites is, as was shown today, you know, your own work, phenomenal insight to mechanism, and you really start to see the link between microbiome and effect on brain or other body tissues. And so I think, you know, I mentioned going with Rima to the Gordon conference and literally realizing like this was the holy grail to bring this together, so that you'd gone beyond the composition and the change in relative abundance, but actually understanding something about function. And even though it is very challenging, it's untargeted many times that you get in the breakthrough, I think that integration is going to really help with the therapeutics and the development. Diagnostic, I think the diagnostic approach, we haven't seen so many on the diagnostic side, but I think the ability to use either metabolite signature or microbiome signature to stratify patients is going to be phenomenal, and I think that is something that we're going to see coming through. Yeah.
And I know we're out of time, but maybe just a very, very quick answer, because I think it's relevant to the topic of spaceflight. Is are you knowledgeable, to whatever degree you can respond to this, are you knowledgeable about any companies in the microbiome space looking at bone loss?
Bone loss, I will say yes. I can't say yes, but I can't disclose who, but yes, I am. Yes.
Thank you, Denise. That was really fascinating.
Okay. Super. Thanks, George. Thank you very much.
Can we have a private email later and you'll tell me who the company is?